One second. Okay, now you're good. Live stream is good.
Commendation of Gabriella Swearingen, Caitlin Ramos, and Jennifer Wilkins. Whereas Gabriella Swearingen, Caitlin Ramos, and Jennifer Wilkins work for the Washington County Health and Human Services Department, where every day they commit to protecting and serving the most vulnerable in our community. And whereas on September 11, 2024, senior social worker Gabriella Swearingen was contacted on the after-hours intake line by the Kewaskum Police Department to investigate a 911 call about a youth who was making threats of harm to other students. And whereas senior social worker Swearingen contacted the after-hours on-call supervisor, Jennifer Wilkins, who guided her to dispatch into the community with acute care services crisis worker Caitlin Ramos to complete an assessment. And whereas senior social worker Swearingen and crisis worker Ramos utilized their professional expertise to interview, investigate, assess, and determine a course of action that ensured the safety of the youth and the community at large. And whereas senior social worker Swearingen, crisis worker Ramos, and supervisor Wilkins' actions led to a positive outcome, potentially thwarting a significant threat to the community and supported the youth in getting the services they need. And whereas without the dedication and commitment of professionals such as Gabriella Swearingen, Caitlin Ramos, and Jennifer Wilkins, the Washington County Health and Human Services could not achieve its mission. It would not be able to provide the safety net necessary to protect our community. And now, therefore, I, Josh Showman, Washington County Executive, and Jeffrey Schleif, County Board Chair, on behalf of the Washington County Board of Supervisors, do hereby proclaim October 9th, 2024 as a day of recognition for Gabriella Swearingen, Caitlin Ramos, and Jennifer Wilkins, and commend them for their notable contributions to our great community of Washington.
I mean, as nice as it is to have.
As the county executive said, it's heartwarming to see professionals do their job and excel and prevent something, because we don't always know when something was prevented. So thank you again. Our next item is personal appearance. Information regarding sale of county lands, which will be presented by Scott Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In your packet, I apologize, I did not get this in the packet in time, but I did do a handout prior to the meeting, and up on the screen, hopefully shortly, you'll get that same information on the packet, number 5.
Do you want it on the screen?
Yes,
Okay,
please.
yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you'll see in that packet, what we're looking at is all the land that was either acquired or sold or provided to another municipality over the last 10 years in Washington County. I think it's important to notice that we've been actively under the county executive and before that county administrator Shulman actively getting land back on the tax rolls. And you'll see that last page of the packet is a table, and that table and map were put together by our GIS director Eric Damcott. So a big thank you for him for completing that for us. And as you see in that table, as well as the maps that are associated with it, there's no way you're going to read that up on the screen. That's why you got the print in front of you. But it shows just the completed acquisitions, the lands that we actually acquired in that 10-year period, and as well as some right of way that we did as well. So you'll see we acquired some land by Fair Park. You may recall just north of there for parking and storage units that were out there. a potential radio site in Erin, as well as we had to do some land acquisition for the vacation of Schmidt Road here, just north of the campus. You'll see that we also have completed land sales. Again, some were a net zero because it was part of a larger project like Ridge Run Park to the city of West Bend, no cost there. Cedar Lake Wayside, Lizard Mountain Park, which went back to the state. So even though they might not have gone back on the tax roll, they're now being maintained by another entity, again, not being maintained by Washington County, so an overall savings from that. But also you can see, we did the Little League Complex, Marks Woods, so part of the park's fiscal sustainability plan is to get some of those, that parkland by Ackerman's back on the tax roll. And now we're actively working on right away going back onto the tax roll as well throughout the state. You've seen a couple at this body. I will have several more coming over the next several years throughout the area. You can see that they're right away acreage. You approved several of those already on Highway G last month. Highway D's been approved. Highway Q's hopefully this year yet. And you can see the roughly dozen or 15 so down below, and that rough acreage associated with those. Remember, those are part of that. The 980 discussion that was had at the board level as far as that's a sex offender location. So we're trying to make sure we have that right away back in the tax rolls. And I wanted to go through that process again to potentially house those 980 people on a county right away near people. So we've been pretty successful with contacting local people that are looking at having that land back on the tax roll. And the one on Highway Q, the person actually contacted us. So that was a positive move. So you'll see there's also a map associated with that. Oh, no problem. And you can see that it's not like it's one location right in the city of West Bend or city of Hartford, but you can see the locations are scattered throughout the county that this is happening. They're actually color coded with the table before it we saw, whether in acquisition, a purchase, or right of way. And not to be lost in the minutia a little bit is the last page, which is the last map, excuse me, which is the highway jurisdictional transfers that we've been able to accomplish also in that time period. We've added a couple roadway segments to the highway system, but you can see that the net gain has been to be able to remove those from highway systems, so we're not maintaining those, given to the locals. Usually with the cash payment along with that, so they can utilize that for other roadway work that they could do in their communities or municipalities. So that's what we have for you in the report. Certainly happy to answer any questions that you may have. We've been actively pursuing that, as you can see, for the last 10 years, and we'll continue to do so as we see fit, as the body approves.
Any questions, comments, discussion? There being none, you can move on to the next item, which is the master plan.
Oh, you do want it on? Oh, sorry. Okay. Is it on the same?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. There it is. So wanted to talk to everybody a little bit about a number of projects. The focus of the presentation that you're going to see today has mostly to do with the south side of Washington Street, west of Indiana Avenue, and east of the Samaritan EOM. But holistically, this is a larger discussion on heels of the presentation you just got from Scott on putting properties back on the tax roll. This is very much in alignment with doing just that. And then how does that fit in holistically to our master plan for the campus that I think the county board adopted maybe 2 or 3 years ago. So what you're looking at, if we can go to the next slide, please, is a number of things. Everything focusing on south of Washington Street, or 33. So we're going to talk about what it would look like potentially if we were to put those properties back on the tax roll. What it might look like if that happens, moving the PAC over to this side of the street, somewhere adjacent to this building. You might recall master plan had a pretty significant addition related to that, as well as what types of new developments So we did some preliminary analysis on what type of development might happen there, kind of relative to what you see around it. And then what type of income that would create, specifically what type of property tax that would generate. We didn't do any anticipations in terms of income tax or sales tax or any of those types of things, simply property tax. And then look out over the next 40 years and what that might be. When we get done with the presentation, really my ask of this group, whether it's through the executive committee or another mechanism at the will of the chairman in this body, to really start to put together a work group that's going to start talking long-term about how to effectuate some of the things that we're going to hear today. At any point in the conversation, if you'd be willing or interested in firing questions, please do those. So the project summary as a whole is, as I just alluded to, we're very focused on our mission, as you all know, and this specifically hits on running a well-governed and administered county. So what we're looking at overall is about $16.5 million in new tax revenue and upkeep cost savings over the next 40 years. And we only did 40 years, obviously. Once you put property back on the tax roll, it's a perpetual revenue source. From the government perspective, it's a perpetual source of prosperity from the individual perspective. But we tried to cap it to basically a generational, what's the generational impact? And we anticipate that to be about $16.5 million. Now, what you're going to see as you go through this is there's all kinds of assumptions that are built in, so you can change those assumptions up and down. But suffice it to say, over a generation, it's a multi-million-dollar impact. And we did a relatively conservative analysis. That impact would include 118 new housing units. Again, we're assuming relatively conservatively next generation housing type development. You'll see that there's some apartment type development as that fits the nature of that neighborhood. And over the course of about just over 30 years in our projections, again, very conservative, we would have enough revenue to pay for any cost of building a facility here to replace the PAC. So the total savings from the PSC, this is specifically looking at major projects over the next 25 years. You can read them for yourself. But basically what this is telling you is, of course, building a newer building, at least for the initial term, 25 years or so, you're going to see a savings in some of those more major capital outlay type expenses. A good example of this is what's happening right now with the highway department, which is getting to be right around that age. And of course, at the 20 to 25 year mark, you start to see all of the mechanicals start to need to be replaced, right? The boilers, the hot water heaters, rooftop units, all of those things. This is a breakdown of the new type of a development. Basically, what we try to do is take the property that's there, look around at the neighborhoods predominantly to the west and to the east, and try to anticipate what would be the type of development that we could anticipate. The reason we did that was we wanted to try and get as good of a handle as we could on, if you're to put the property back on the tax roll, what likely are you to see in terms of taxation? This isn't supposed to be this is the design, this isn't a developer's type of analysis or any kind of plan even. It's really just a thumbnail sketch of this is the type of development we think could exist there and the type of revenue it could produce. You'll see that in a second. So when you contemplate, we kind of look at it the same way that we look at a tax increment finance district. You take essentially the total amount of property value that all of those developments that you saw on the previous slide would create. You multiply it by the current tax rate here in the city of West Bend, and that gives you an annual total tax collection. Now, to be clear, we're talking about the totality of the property tax bill. We're not talking just about the county portion. We're talking about school district, city, technical college, and the county. So that's a $974,000 for all of those. But once again, remember, this is once it's on the tax roll, it's perpetual. We did build in a kind of an inflationary index of about 3% to that property value growth. So we are acknowledging that once it's built, it is going to increase in value over time. And then you can see, once again, the initial estimated property value, once everything is fully developed. And if it were to be developed in this kind of manner, would be about $42.5 million. So here's a flashy looking spreadsheet, for those of you who are interested in spreadsheets. Trying to make it as sexy as we possibly can, that tries to break down some of the cost versus benefit, if you will, over the next 40 years. So we give you an annual look on the left-hand column, and then on the right-hand column, what's that generational impact over 40 years? We assume approximately a $25 million building. You know, that number, of course, moves based on what you want to do. The master plan had it somewhere in that $25 to $28 million range. I think a lot of it depends on any number of factors, quite honestly, but when we talk about the remodeling project in this portion, the Herbert J. Tenney's Government Center, moving the clerk's office and the treasurer's office and the register of deeds office to the front and so on and so forth. And then putting some of the park staff up in that second floor, that will make a huge impact on that $28 million number. So I think some of it ebbs and flows, but bottom line is realistically, we could get to a $25 million number, we feel. There would probably be some expense that's needed for demolition of the PAC. Whether we do that, whether a developer does that is yet to be determined, but we assume we would have to take on that cost. Same thing with engineering. We assume we have to take on that cost and any environmental impacts. It's important to know that south of 33, just to the east of the Public Agency Center, there's actually the foundation of the old chapel. Some of you might probably been around long enough to remember that when that was there, it was a senior center for a long, long time. The foundation of that building, or at least parts of it, are still there. You go a little bit farther east, closer to Samaritan, there's also the foundation, I think the whole basement actually, of what we used to call Annex 2. I think that was originally, way back in the day, part of the old county home, or maybe the county insane asylum, one or two. So both of those things would have to be contemplated, and that's what the environmental impact analysis would help us determine. Maybe where we can or where we can't construct. Then the new building projects, that's that analysis that you saw earlier, what it would cost if you were to have a new building versus what the old one was, and how much that saves over a 40-year period of time. We still anticipate there's going to be some PAC project costs that come off then. That $188,000 then is, you might consider it a revenue, so to speak. It's a savings more than it is a revenue. And then finally, that $974,000 a year in new property tax by putting properties back on the tax roll. So as is illustrated in Scott's presentation a moment ago, our motivation to get as much back on the tax roll as we possibly can while protecting ourselves for future expansion is an important thing for us to do, and it has a material impact. In one generation, on basically 15 acres, you have the potential of $40 million in property tax revenue, and of course, lots of prosperity on top of that. So then that whole number that you saw on the bottom of that slide is shown here in graph form. Basically, the net analysis is about $16 million over one generation in property tax revenues. Of course, again, that doesn't anticipate anything with regards to any county sales tax. But suffice to say that one 15-acre parcel has pretty demonstrable impact here to be able to afford you the opportunity to start talking about moving everything over to one side of the street and again, putting as much back on the property tax rolls as you possibly can. What you'll notice was not in this analysis is basically anything else we own, and we own a lot. So everything from basically the Gale, now Manitou facility, all the way north. We actually have some ownership stake of some variety in the Fairpark School. Everything behind that, I think there's approximately 40 acres or so of farm field from the Eisenbahn Trail all the way to Schmidt Road. And then we also own across Schmidt Road, past the highway shop, all the way to River Road where the solar panels are, so we have dozens of acres, I'll just say, dozens of acres of property that could be part of a future analysis. I think that's work that a committee should do, the executive committee, whoever you think is the right arm. But the bottom line is, putting together a master plan that ultimately puts as much of that property back on the tax rolls as we can, and still protects some of the land for us to have some future expansion, I think is appropriate. I think this very rudimentary analysis, which was, I think, enough to prove a point that in one generation you can do a pretty demonstrable change here and cover a bulk of your costs, or at least a large portion of your costs. Presents a worthwhile conversation. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Again, my ask is that the county board engage, whether it's an ad hoc committee or whether it's executive committee, engage the discussion about beginning this process.
Supervisor Schwab.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, County Executive, for that report. Quick question. There was one slide where you had a combination of homes, duplexes, apartment buildings, office buildings, all that good stuff. Is it expected that just one of those things would work on that lot, or that a combination of all of them would be on that lot? What's the purpose of this slide?
Yeah, thank you. Good question. This represents the combination, all of those things would be on that 15-acre parcel. And again, it was based on a combination of, for example, the Trails Edge Apartments downtown, the Stifel building downtown. We tried to use so the house is literally across the street on Indiana Avenue. We tried to use as much similar existing development and then basically just plop it in, that's in that section. So it would be all of those pieces.
Thank you.
Yes.
Supervisor Bossert.
Okay, can you go back to the screen with the two columns? That one there, yeah. So at the bottom, you have a net total of 16.5 million in savings.
Well,
What,
let me clarify, it's not savings per se, I would say the 7.5 million is probably savings. So the third row from the bottom right, the 38.9 is tax revenue.
Yep.
And then if you net all of that together, it's 16.5 net.
right,
Next.
now that tax revenue is not Washington County's portion, that's total, right?
100%.
So I would be curious to see if we saw just Washington County's portion, what the impact on our county budget would be.
Sure, and we can give you that analysis.
All right,
It'll be a fraction of the 38.9, but it'll be million.
yeah, if you had to wing it here, yeah, rough
Pass it
ballpark,
down.
what would you say?
Well, our tax rate is what,
I
Aaron?
think we just added down.
$1.75, so maybe 15% of that. 10 to 15% of that. 1.6 to 2 million.
All right, thank you.
Supervisor Kelly.
Well, that actually did kind of answer my question, because we're gonna be doing.
Sorry, let me rephrase that. I'm looking at the 60 number. It's actually the 38 point, we'll say 39 number. So it's 10 to 15% of that. So it's 3.9 to 5.
So, yeah, that kind of answered my question, is like, we, the county, are going to be laying out the money, obviously, to build a new building, relocate our staff and facilities and all the rest of that. And this 16 million is total taxes to the community, so it's not like a repayment on the money we're putting out.
It is not a repayment on the money we're putting out.
Right.
No.
So, and that's why I'm kind of pointing that out a little bit, so people understand this is still gonna require output on their part.
It will.
However, even having said that, I've always been a huge proponent of reducing the county's footprint. Because we do own a lot of land all around this facility that basically I think would be better on the tax rolls. and certainly better for the city of West Bend. Quite a bit of it is actually in my district. So I would like to see that go back on the tax rolls.
And to be clear, I thank you for framing it that way, because to be clear, I think there needs to be, I suppose, two separate discussions. One is an economic impact, which this is much closer to an economic impact. And another is what's the budget impact. I mean, historically, we've, I think, borrowed 4 times now in the last 10 years. And all 4 times we've borrowed without raising taxes. I assume there will be some component of that, but I think what this analysis shows you is at some point you can look and say, okay, it's worth it to have us, 2 pennies on the mill rate to be able to buy that kind of economic development, and that goes away after 20 years and forever thereafter. That's I think the bigger point.
Right, and that's what I kind of want to point out here too, is to the people, is that this could require us to actually have to take out a pretty sizable loan. It will probably require us to raise the rate to a certain point to cover that. However, all the taxing entities will actually benefit from that. So that's the important point. When you put this land back into the taxable column, the school districts benefit, the county benefits, the local municipality benefits. So I think that's the reason why we should definitely keep an open mind to this plan and consider reducing our footprint. Thank you.
Supervisor Westfalen.
District question, in the slides, we just showed housing. Would there be maybe opportunities outside of housing to repurpose this land? Industrial or?
Probably not industrial, but if you look, we estimated 20,000 square feet of office space. I mean, it's certainly possible, especially on 33 in particular, that it could be more than that. The reason we didn't put as much of it in there, it's very valuable. So the higher we inflate that number, the more those dollar amounts start to look really, really good. And then you guys make a decision. Next thing you know, we've got apartment buildings and it actually doesn't perform nearly. So we thought, well, let's just make a small assumption. Let's steeple building is a good example. Nice project, nice development, but not too aggressive. So I think it really just depends. I mean, the bottom line is county probably doesn't end up in the development business. We may prep the site, for example, but realistically speaking, we're probably talking about, an RFP process of some sort, bring a developer in, have them talk to us, perhaps work with the city planner, the city administrator, and really look what fits there relative to what's around. That's why we try to pick and choose pieces that look similar to what's in the neighborhood. Makes sense. Thank you. 25 years ago, industrial would have made sense.
Supervisor Schottenheimer.
Thank you. Back to that double list again.
Yeah.
I'm gonna pick on that one for a little bit.
Sure.
So you're looking at the PAC demolition. Is there any reason we're not selling that building outright versus demoing? I mean, there you got a net sale versus 863,000 of demoing. You got a vacant land to put money on, but is it worth more to sell the building?
So we talked about, do we put in not just the building, but selling the land holistically? And again, it starts to play with these numbers and you can kind of inflate that to whatever you'd like to inflate it to. But we thought the more conservative thing to do was assume we're gonna have to take the building down. That costs us money. If we sell it, great. It just ends in the positive column. But if you shift that number, let's say we switch that from 863 expense to a $3 million revenue, it moves the bottom line, but it's not like it moves at 50%. It moves at 10 or 15%.
No, but it's just a different option.
It is 100%, absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay. I think it would probably also inform more of the down payment on that top line, new building, right? So the county has done historically as well, even long before any of our faces were here. They'd have a $25 million loan and they pay 5,000 cash first and then only make it 20 million. That, when they built the the jail, I know something similar, at least was debated, I don't know if it's ultimately what happened, but. Unfortunately, they did the same thing in the PAC and built a cheap piece of junk, but, that is not the case over at the Justice Center and the Sheriff's Office.
Some of us are at the disadvantage of being a long ways away from the screens or seeing them from the edge.
Yeah.
Is this PowerPoint presentation gonna be distributed?
It is, we were literally working on it up to like today, I think like 2 hours ago, so. We kept, I changed that number from 20 million to 25 million, I think at about 3 o'clock. Like, let's assume high.
I thought you were being conservative.
I am being conservative.
Supervisor Bossert,
So I was at the August meeting for the UW Extension Campus or UW Washington County campus. I have not been following that very closely since then. Is that still an option for replacing the PAC instead of building a $25 million building?
That's a really good question. I guess I would say anything's possible. The inefficiency that we would take on by doing that, I think we'd really have to talk that through. I think that's exactly why a committee would make sense. You know, bring Julian, bring her staff in, bring Jamie's staff in, and have that discussion. And I think it just really depends on what that building end up getting utilized as. If it's an educational institution, there's probably certain things that do make sense. If it's, on the other hand, if there's a lot of senior-based activities, there's maybe other things that make sense, and maybe they both don't make sense. So there's a lot of synergy having, all of our operation in one campus. A lot of counties don't have that, but I think over time you'd see that we actually gain economic efficiency by having us close. And when we're talking about building a building like this, I mean, the one we're standing in right now has been here 65 years. So we're not talking about a $25 million investment that's gonna last a decade. It's probably gonna last probably 3 or 4 generations. The last old courthouse, you know, was probably 3-generation building. So I would hope we would be talking in those terms. But to answer your question directly, yes, that could be a conversation. I think the big takeaway, again, is certainly asking you to engage in discussion as the county board. In addition to that, though, this really comes down to, you can see there's clearly an economic impact. Getting stuff back on the tax roll should, in my opinion, be priority number 1, which is why we're doing so much of it through Scott's office. And in addition to that, really the question becomes, can we afford the ongoing principal and interest cost of whether it's a $20 million building or a $25 million building, or do it right once so that it lasts, you know, 75 or 100 years, and then don't mess with it again. Don't build something that in 30 years you keep bashing your head against the wall because the walls continue to leak no matter how many times you fix the roof or fix the windows, or, I mean, that's literally the PAC. So I think it really again, getting back to that, your question, Supervisor Kelly, about budget specifically, I think we need to answer the question of, can we produce principal and interest payments or get them low enough that we go, okay, if it only impacts the tax levy or tax rate 2 cents for 20 years for a 75-year impact, let's do it. Or 5 cents or 7 cents or whatever the number is. And in the meantime, like we've done with other debt, can we find other revenue sources to help pay for that principal and interest? So we're not increasing property tax levy. I think you put those pieces together and can produce this kind of economic impact. Not sure why we wouldn't do that.
Supervisor Bossert, last chance.
So that kind of serves as a good segue then into my next thought. You talk about all the land we have north of the county building. Some of that is right on the Eisenbahn Trail, which makes it pretty prime real estate. A lot of this development in the city right now is happening right on the Eisenbahn Trail. I look at what that trail looked like 15 years ago compared to today, and it's a dramatic difference. Are we beginning plans to sell off that land? And could some of that be used to help fund this if we wanted to go this route?
I think the answer to both of those questions is yes. By answering yes to the second one, you answer yes to the first one. So I think what I didn't want to do is come in and say, you know, here's the full 60 acres, and if we fully developed it, here's your green line, and why wouldn't we do that? I mean, I think there's a worthwhile pragmatic discussion that needs to happen at the board level. You start getting close to the highway shop, for example, this piece you might not want, but this one we definitely want to hold. The closer you get to the jail, of course. And then it gets more complicated, right? So you may not know this, but the Fair Park School is called the Fair Park School because that's where the Fair Park was. Which means it's county land. So that school is sitting on county property, and the deed is a little bit wonky, but it's similar. There's pieces of co-ownership. Is that an easy way to say it, Brad?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's complicated, but you literally could develop everything from Gale all the way to Regalware. And probably that number would multiply by 10, maybe more. I mean, there's that much land, and you're right. I mean, I think we're just east of the Eisenbach. I don't think we actually butt up to it, right? We get close. And then a little developer you might know named Diane Hendricks owns the property just west. So it's possible that you could develop everything, including that property. But this was really just, I know at the last, was it 2 months ago, you had a meeting and there was all this concern or consternation about we've got to make decisions to do things. This isn't that. I mean, we're talking 40-year analysis. But the minute you start down this path, you really got to start thinking about how are we using this space most efficiently so that you can lower that $25 million number as low as you can get it, and then go from there. So it's complicated, I guess, is I wanted to just show as conservatively as possible, just that piece. If you just do that, I think the economics point to, this makes a hell of a lot of sense. We need to investigate this.
Okay, and then I think one last thing, you mentioned doing it right the first time. I think hindsight being 2020, if the people who built the public agency center could go back and do it over, they probably would have built it on this side of the road to begin with. Is that a fair
Well,
assessment?
I don't think so, because you gotta remember, that was the 1990s, and at that time, we had 3 other buildings over there. Yeah, including, oh yeah, and the Samaritan, so, and you know, we just had an employee who announced to the whole crowd that she worked at the old courthouse for a year before moving into that.
Yeah.
So, you know, I, in hindsight, knowing what we know now, yeah,
Yeah.
they probably for sure would have built differently, but knowing what they knew then, I can totally see why they did it the way they did.
Yeah, I think we're both saying the same thing. there.
And
Thank you.
I think it was after that Gale built this new facility, newer facility, right?
Mhm.
So that, you know, there was a lot of different things happening. The economy was quite different in the 1990s. So.
Supervisor Kelly.
So just one thing real quickly, we probably, we need, I think, an ad hoc committee and, you know, because you're gonna have to figure out how to break this thing up or maybe do it as a whole project with PAC and Fair Park, who knows? I mean, it could go a lot of different directions. So keeping that in mind, what kind of timeline, and I know it's wildly estimated at this point, but what are we thinking? 5 years, 3 years, you know, where are we?
Julie ordered some boxes yesterday, is what I understand. No, I'm kidding. I literally said that just to needle her, because this drives her nuts. And it drives the team more nuts. But I think practically speaking, the remodeling that needs to happen here, the move of all the constitutional officers, I really believe this board needs to act on that very soon. Like, get that moving in 2025. I'll come to you in the next couple of weeks, actually, the county board in the next month, with a package that once again borrows dollars without raising taxes, to be able to accomplish that. And then I would say, while literally while the shovels are going in the ground, you need to start talking about the next steps. how much of our property do we talk about developing? How fast can we move? We've got several hundred employees over there, so it's not as if we can say, we're doing this now and January 1st, 2026, they're gonna move across the street. And you gotta do some staging, where are they gonna go while that building's coming down, or while this one's going up, or all that's gotta get thought through. These are all the reasons I had no interest in doing a building project while I was here, but here we are. So I think it's very possible, 3 to 5 years, if that's what you chose. I also think 10 years could be very realistic, and you could push this off for longer than that. I do think there's a moment in time in this economy where developing properties like the ones we've just talked about today makes a hell of a lot of sense if you do the right kind of developments. But so short answer is it could happen in 3 years, it could happen in 10 years.
Right, and I would tend to agree that if you want to maximize that land going back into the public taxation, I would think the next 3 to 5, considering the real estate shortages where we're at in housing and stuff like that. So you'd really be maximizing your dollars. And also, I think one more thing, just kind of the board to think about, or the chairman to think about too, is a project like this certainly is going to involve the city of West Bend. And so I don't know how that would look, but it would be nice if we were able to sit down and work together. And I don't know if they'd be part of that ad hoc, or maybe some type of other setup that you could think of. Because certainly we're going to need their blessing for what we develop and how we develop it and what. So
Yeah,
a lot of conversation.
It is, and that's a really great point. I think when I said moment in time, I think one of the things that I would compliment the city on is they've done a lot of nice development downtown. I personally think their TIF districts, the way they managed them isn't great, but that doesn't matter. They built a lot of really nice buildings down there that are gonna generate property tax revenue for years and years and years. I mean, it took down I think the old brewery was assessed like $600,000 or something, and that new building is 35 million. I mean, you can't argue with that. You can argue with stretching TIFs to pay for pet projects, but you can't argue with that development. They're doing Trails Edge is another one. I mean, it's beautiful. It's great. So, and they're in that mode. So let's take advantage of something they're good at and interested in, and something we have an opportunity and are also interested in. And I don't think we'll have to use a good political link. So yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think we bring them in sooner rather than later, but I think this body has to be on board with going down the path. I mean, just talking about that side of the street alone, that's a big deal. You start working your way up Eisenbach Trail. I mean, get ready.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Very, very good thoughts all. We'll do our best to be good stewards of the property that the taxpayers own. And we'll form a committee at some point, because Mr. Kelly just told me I need to.
No. Should you?
But I think it's a good idea and very good thoughts. So we'll move on to resolution 28, authorizing the Washington County Information Technology Department to provide information technology services to the town of Erin as part of shared revenue of the county sales tax. Motion by Supervisor Bostic, second by Supervisor Krebs. Any questions or comments? There being none, this is a simple majority vote, so we'll vote electronically.
Unanimous.
Passes unanimously. Next is resolution 29, rescinding the appointment of the Waukesha County Medical Examiner. Motion and a second, please. Supervisor Schwab, Supervisor Toma. Any discussion? Supervisor Kelly.
Just a question, the way it is, I guess my question directly is it normal practice for the executive to appoint medical examiners? Is that similar to like a cabinet position? Is that typical and normal for, like say Milwaukee, Waukesha, those places that have?
Okay.
I'll
county
let Brad,
executives?
You
I'll
can
let
turn
Brad
his mic
answer
down.
that. It's statutory.
Okay, that's all I need to know. Thank you.
Supervisor Krebs, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Making sure I understand what we're doing here. Waukesha County has a medical examiner who acts as ours right now. By not having theirs as ours, we already have a deputy chief medical examiner. Will they be promoted to medical examiner? So like, I'm trying to figure out if we're gonna create an additional position in this process.
Ms. Driscoll?
Yes, so the current chief deputy medical examiner will be the appointed medical examiner, so there will not be an additional position.
So that employee will be a dual role or dual position,
She will have a new role, essentially, a new position,
but we won't have to fill the old position.
correct?
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions or discussion? There being none, we'll vote electronically. It passes unanimously. Next is resolution 30 to adopt the hazard mitigation plan for Washington County. Motion in a second, please. Supervisor Despalik, Supervisor Toma. Any questions on this? Basically, we start the ball rolling by passing this, and then all the municipalities have to sign on, and then the whole package gets forwarded to the FEMA. Supervisor Schott.
Thank you, John. Just to bring everybody up to speed here, so the town of Wayne, I guess the town of Kewaskum, reached out to us with concerns. I honestly didn't know what their concerns were because there wasn't any changes on this from the first original adoption back, I believe, in 17 or something like that.
That's a long time ago.
So if I could just talk to Dave here for a second, and I know I talked to you beforehand, but just to share it with everybody else. Do you know of any changes that were made since this was adopted the first time?
No, it's seamless update. Everything is pretty much the same, with the exception of one thing. It's 300 pages smaller.
That's
So,
good.
Yes, so it's relative. Supervisor Trotter had reached out earlier in the week with some concerns, and I hope I answered the questions appropriately for your constituency, so. But no, very small minor changes.
Okay, obviously, we'll be going to their meetings later in the week to
Yes.
discuss with them what issues, if any. I didn't see any personally, but whatever they may have. But then I guess to ask Brad is do all the townships have to adopt this, or what happens if they don't? Say if a handful say, no, we're not passing this, we're not agreeing to it. Does it matter? I mean, we still adopted, right?
Yeah, that would be my expectation. I mean,
Oops, sorry.
I can speak to that.
Oh, okay, sorry, I wasn't sure if I had to go
Certainly.
legal or not.
So typically speaking, the cities and villages need to approve the hazard mitigation plan after your action tonight.
Okay,
The towns don't necessarily have to, but I prefer to have a
Oh,
unanimous
100%.
and consensus agreement throughout the county.
okay. Then if they don't agree, I noticed one of your responses was FEMA pays 75%, the local township pays 25%.
Correct.
If they don't agree to this and don't adopt it, are they responsible for that 25%, or does that fall upon the county? or how does that work?
It's still the local's responsibility.
Whether they agree or not?
Correct.
Okay, so this, you know, I guess it would be upon us then to try to convince them that
Right.
this is still a good plan.
It is
And
still
it's
a good plan.
similar to the one they already adopted, or most
Yes,
of
and
them did.
and again, just to reiterate, the towns aren't required to adopt it.
Okay,
It's cities and villages, and it's a federal issue in conjunction with the counties.
perfect, thank you.
Supervisor Troutner.
And I just wanted to make sure if you could, just let everybody know it's not tied in with the farmland
It is
preservation.
not tied into the farmland preservation plan.
Thank you.
Yes.
Any further discussion? There being none, we will vote electronically. It's also a majority vote.
Mhm.
Passes unanimously. Our next item is Resolution 31, Wisconsin DOT request for land purchase for and temporary easements to replace curb ramps to meet ADA standards. Motion and a second, please. Supervisor Schultheis, Supervisor Toma. Do we have any questions of Mr. Schmidt? There being none, we'll vote electronically.
Unanimous.
Also passes unanimously. We'll move on to resolution 32, which is a grant application and general fund transfer for fiscal year 2025 Next Generation 911 GIS project. Supervisor Bossert. Supervisor Vespalic. Any questions? Okay, we'll vote electronically. This requires a 2/3 majority.
Unanimous.
Passes unanimously. And our last item is resolution 33, general fund transfer for election initiative video surveillance for drop boxes. Motion by Supervisor Hartwig.
Oh, motion to suspend the rules.
Okay, before we do that, we need a motion to suspend the rules because this particular item didn't come to any standing committee. It's coming right to the board. Supervisor Kelling moves to suspend the rules, second by Supervisor Krebs. Can we do a voice?
Yep.
That's what
Yes.
she's here for. And we can do a voice. We'll do a voice vote on that. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, now we'll take the motion. Supervisor Conrath and Supervisor Schwab. Any questions or discussion? Supervisor Gorak.
Your mic, please.
Out of practice. So I appreciate that, you want to put cameras on the drop boxes. However, first of all, I think election integrity initiative should be for the purpose of assuring the integrity of our elections, not just to give people confidence in our elections. And while installing cameras at drop boxes may symbolize an effort towards election integrity, if we don't include monitoring the cameras in a plan of action in the event of wrongdoing captured by the cameras, this isn't an actual election integrity effort. So I'd like to see a list of exactly where these cameras will be located, how they will be monitored, how long the camera footage will be kept. I don't think it's called footage anymore, but you know what I mean. And the procedure to follow in the event that suspected wrongdoing is captured on the cameras. Every citizen should have access to the camera to live stream of the camera and instructions on how to proceed if they see something suspicious.
And the cameras can have, they can also be a deterrent to wrongdoing if people know that the cameras will be monitored. But if they're not monitored, you can put up fake cameras and it would be just as good. So, do we have a plan?
So our initiative is the funding, and as you know, our elections in Wisconsin are run at the localist level. The purview of drop boxes and the cameras would be at the discretion of the municipality. So as your concerns are valid, I would recommend taking those to your municipalities, your municipal clerks. There are approximately 12 municipalities currently utilizing drop boxes out of our 20. And of those, there are 3 that have cameras already. So they've been in place. And a little history on the drop boxes in Washington County. The majority of the drop boxes are actually built into the buildings, which have been there for 40, 50, 60 years and have been used pre-COVID, pre-2020. In 2022, the drop boxes, even the ones built into the buildings, were found to be illegal due to the Supreme Court's decision to ban drop boxes. And at that time, they banned the freestanding drop boxes, and then clarification was requested from the Supreme Court regarding the ones that were built into the buildings. And the clarification came back as the drop boxes could not be utilized if they were not manned or unmanned drop boxes. Well, you can't say that a drop slot, even if secured in the building, is manned. So those were then banned in 2022 as well. Now with the changes in July of this year, allowing for drop boxes, this is just a funding initiative. The county does not have any say in what the municipalities do in regards to their drop boxes. We don't have a say whether they utilize a drop box, whether they don't, whether they have surveillance or not. The state can't require that either. Guidance that has come from the state is best practices, and again, cannot require a municipality to do one thing or another. What we're trying to do is allow for them to have the funding to be able to have a security measure in place. We can't determine what best meets each municipal clerk's needs. Like I said, some are in their entryway, some are just outside of their front door. We can't determine what that best practice is or what type of camera they even utilize at that point. We're just trying to allow for the funding mechanism to be a non-issue. So.
Okay, so if I contact you tomorrow, can I get a list of the 12 locations where we will be putting them and the 3 that
I can read them to you right now. So it's just a survey that I had sent out. So as of right now, the municipalities that were planning at the time when I sent out our survey would be the town of Erin, the town of Barton, the village of Slinger, the town of Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I don't know if everyone wants to hear them, but there are 12. There are 5 that at this point in time have said that no, they're not planning to utilize them. 2 do have them that are attached to their building or in the building structure itself. And those 2 are not utilizing them. There is also actually 1 additional municipality that didn't respond to our survey that is not utilizing it due to their surveillance cameras not being functioning at this time. But they are interested in utilizing the funding that if you were to approve it, to get their surveillance cameras to work again. And like I mentioned, these drop boxes, they're not freestanding drop boxes on street corners. They are literally built into the brick of the building or the door glass. Sure. But they're a little bit different. So putting surveillance on our actual municipal buildings also serves a bigger purpose of security for our municipalities too, outside of elections. So when you think of an odd election year, and I mean odd as in the year, next year we'll have 1 or 2 elections. An even year we'll have 4, possibly 4 or 3. And so these would be, I mean, if the municipalities want to, they would be utilized all year long, 365 days, and serve that security purpose for them as well, which is a positive all year long.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm gonna vote yes for this, but I do appreciate that I can get the lists because I will contact those municipalities to see what kind of surveillance and what their plan is if there's any wrongdoing
Which is-
doing that anybody notices.
Which is completely fine. Yep.
Thanks.
Supervisor Pridemore.
I guess my question is kind of like hers.
Mhm.
So let's say can somebody put 20 ballots at one time into the?
That's illegal. That's illegal.
So if they do, because I know people who are willing to volunteer and demand these, to make sure
So-
that we're not having this illegal voting.
So anyone could be an observer and stand outside the area where that drop box or drop slot is, if they wanted 24/7. It's public land.
So where do you go to, like in Aaron, let's say if we see somebody doing shenanigans, where do we go to?
So the town of Aaron's drop box is attached to the building.
Right, but who do we talk to if something's happening? Do we call?
The municipal clerk. Municipal
So
clerk.
the clerk needs to be doing something,
Yep.
okay.
Yep. Our elections are run at the localist level. And I've been mentioning this quite a lot lately with different groups, but Wisconsin is one of 2 states that actually runs our elections at the localist level. We have over 2,000 municipal clerks, which is fantastic because it means smaller populations within our municipalities. And so our municipalities know their voters. I mean, that's a great thing to have. Other states, they run elections at the county level, they run them at the state level, and then you stop having that familiarity with your constituents.
Supervisor Credit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can we go over how much money we're proposing for this?
Sure.
Cause I see $3,000, but earlier they already funded on the. City of Philadelphia, 150,000 for your elections.
Yep.
And
Up to $150.
Yeah.
I guess like if this is a grant that we would be giving to these municipalities,
Right.
how many grants are we anticipating and how much could we?
Yes.
3,000 doesn't sound like.
Right, so we took into consideration all of the municipalities that were, well, actually all of the municipalities within Washington County. And we took averages of different camera styles and function and came up with our cost average of approximately $85 per camera. I mean, and then we went from there and calculated the annual subscription cost potentially and what the first year cost would be. And that was approximately $2,700 and we rounded up to 3,000. That's where we came up with the cost. So we went through.
Each municipality would be eligible to buy up to $3,000.
Total 3,000 for the whole county. Yeah, 100, it's 100. Our estimate is 181. That's where we came up with the 3,000. No, dollars, sorry, dollars per municipality. Yep. And like I mentioned, there's quite a few that don't plan to utilize it. There's some that actually already have cameras, so this wouldn't apply to them. So our estimate is probably even a little high.
So each individual grant would be $181.
That's our estimate. Yep.
Supervisor Bossert.
So I'm gonna start out by saying that I am very concerned about these drop boxes. If I had my brothers, municipalities would not even use these, but that's not their choice. I did see the documentary 2000 Mules. I know the creator is right-leaning, so that can be a source of criticism. But it presents a pretty compelling case. For those who didn't see it, they combined cell phone data and videos to show that people in the middle of the night were going to anywhere from 20 to 35 ballot boxes and dropping anywhere from 5 to 10 ballots at a time in each box. So that could be 150 to 250 ballots by one individual being filtered into the system through these drop boxes.
Yeah, we're getting a little late.
Well, yeah, I understand. I'm gonna pivot here, so. Now, we can only control the things that we can control. We don't rule over the cities and villages and towns. I can hope that they will seek out ways to maximize the use of cameras to prevent any intentional voter fraud. I'm glad that we're doing everything we can at the county level to prevent voter fraud, and I encourage everybody to vote for this. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Mary.
Thank you, Chair. It's our understanding that the municipalities will be responsible for the installation and maintenance once they've got the equipment we're providing the funding for. That's correct?
Yep, and like I mentioned earlier, we're not going to be in the business of determining what's best for each municipality. They will be doing that. As long as it's some sort of surveillance camera, that's what we'll be funding. And then they will be responsible for any record maintenance, anything like that.
Thank you for taking the initiative on this. Thank you.
Supervisor Troutman.
As a town clerk, in the town of Kewaskum, I'm very excited about this initiative. We do have a Dropbox. I feel very good about it. It was installed after 2020. It was, it's in the building, and you drop your ballot from outside, but it's secure. It's been vetted and tested. But I really like the idea of having a camera on there as well. So thank you, for this initiative. I wish that the Elections Commission, was doing this, and I actually talked with Ashley earlier, and I have a feeling they'll come up with a plan to do this probably in a couple of years, but, thank you.
Supervisor Watson Conrad.
Thank you, Chair, and I also, thank you, Ashley, for this initiative, but, I would appreciate you reading off, who, the municipalities that, you want to participate. As
Sure.
you began, and then, so we can all know right now, and then also it would be, on the public record in this meeting. Thank
Sure.
you.
Yep, and they're not in any particular order. It's just how they filled out our survey. And like I mentioned before, not everyone did respond to the survey. I can't require that either. So the town of Erin will be utilizing a Dropbox. They have interest in surveillance. Town of Barton will be, and they already have surveillance. The village of Slinger will be utilizing it, and they have surveillance already. Town of Trenton will be and is interested in surveillance. A village of Richfield will be and is interested in surveillance. Town of Wayne will be and is also interested. Town of Farmington will be and is interested in surveillance. Town of Jackson will be and is also interested. Town of Hartford will be and is also interested. City of West Bend will be, and they already have surveillance. The city of Hartford will be utilizing one and is interested in surveillance. Town of Kewaskum.
Can I say something? They already have cameras on our.
On theirs?
Yes,
Okay,
they'd be
so maybe
upgrading.
they change. Oh, upgrading. Okay, upgrading their systems. Thank you.
Just so you know, Jim.
Town of
We have two of
Kewaskum.
them.
Oh, sorry.
No, sorry.
No, you're fine. Town of Kewaskum will be and is interested in surveillance. Those that are not going to be utilizing a Dropbox will be the town of Addison, the village of Newburgh, the village of Kewaskum, town of West Bend. And like I mentioned, the town of Addison is potentially interested in utilizing their drop slot that's built into their building if they can have their surveillance repaired.
Any further discussion? Supervisor Newman.
Thank you. Ashley, correct me if I misspeak.
Mhm.
So my understanding is Dropboxes are legal,
Yes.
and this is an initiative to help protect that. I'm very confused why there'd be any concern about these cameras and the monitoring them 24/7. If they weren't there, we'd have nothing. So I'm super confused as why there would be any pushback on this. Like, that's all I have. Thank you.
I haven't heard anything.
Lois.
Supervisor Guerrero.
You missed Lois.
I don't think it's pushback. I appreciate because we are willing to put cameras on the drop boxes. It saves us from trying to recruit people to physically be at each location 24/7 to monitor them. That's why, a live stream or something, or finding out at least how they're being monitored, if there's something, if they're being watched, real time where you can actually pursue legal action if you see some wrongdoing is important, but, it's definitely not pushback. It's a step forward.
Supervisor Krieger,
I just wanted to say something about monitoring them.
Mhm.
You know, if you're going to use a surveillance camera, obviously there's fast forward. You could every morning look at it.
Mhm.
You could probably get done within 10 minutes, a 24-hour time period. And if you see any activity, you're only 24 hours away, so any of the clerks might want to make a suggestion to them that we might have a system or an easy way to monitor it, but banks use them.
Mhm.
They're in our hotels, they're, in our hallways here.
Mhm.
I mean, we monitor things, and of course, the fast forward tells us, here's where the activity occurred. And so I just wanted to make that comment that I think there's a pretty simple way to monitor without doing it 24/7.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, we'll vote electronically. This also requires a 2/3 majority.
Unanimous.
And it passes unanimously. Our next meeting date is Wednesday, November 13th at 6 p.m. This meeting is adjourned.
My municipality, which has 2 utility boxes, they already have. So why would I give it? But since I'm considering.
Okay, thank you.
And since it's like $100 per thing, I'm
Look at
gracious.
her foot, how bruised it is. She needs to wear Crocs. Did you see where her
How to Trenton.
Isn't it
Dogs are
Oh, not lazy. No.
So get out of the way. All right. This thing was bugging me about
Yeah.
rebooting. Thank you.
What? I have to reboot too. Oh, I gotta stop.
Yeah, you want to grab one? Okay. Way off. Thank you.
It was okay? You thought I did good? Okay.
I listened.